So coming on to situations of persistent hypoglycemia. So we have so far looked at the risk factors, which babies you are going to screen. We clearly define that the well babies who don't have a risk factor, you're not going to screen them. We often tell the postnatal staff that babies often sleepy in the first 16 to 24 hours because they are using up their store, and you don't need to prick a baby to check their sugar just because they're not keen to suck. As long as they're responding normally when you handle them, you don't need to worry about a little sluggish suck on the first 24 hours because they're not keen to suck, because they're using their stores. They're also tired from the labor process. So a proper assessment is important, but avoid doing sugar just because the baby is not keen to suck if they otherwise look well. Of course, if you are worried that they are hypotonic, they are sluggish, you do have to test it. So that's where your experience comes in when you assess such babies. So for persistent hypoglycemia, we mentioned that we have glucose infusion rate to prevent hypoglycemia persistently more than 12 in a well-grown or LGA baby. Small for gestation babies may need that infusion for a short period because hyperinsulinemia, which is transient, is often seen. If we have evidence of hypothalamic dysfunction like unstable temperature or micropenis, as we discussed, profound hypoglycemia occurs unexpectedly in a well-grown term baby. Again, this could be hyperinsulinemia. If there are other associated factors like examphallos, for example, with Beckwith-Wiedemann or coloboma with midline defects, there's a family history of sudden death, Ray's syndrome, developmental delay, and so on. If there is anything suspicious of an inborn error of metabolism. So you can categorize these as hyperinsulinism, where it can be congenital hyperinsulinism, a syndromic one like Beckwith-Wiedemann syndrome, or you may have endocrine problems which include pituitary insufficiency, cortisol deficiency, congenital glucagon deficiency. You have epinephrine deficiency as well if the medulla is not well formed. And we have IEMs, which include carbohydrate metabolism ones like galactosemia, hepatic glycogen storage diseases, fructose intolerance. We may have problems with amino acid metabolism like maple syrup urine disease, propionic acidemia, methylmalonic acidemia, tyrosinemia, and so on. And we can have the organic acidemias, glutaric acidemia, methylmalonic acidemia, and problems with the fatty acid metabolism like carnitine deficiency, acyl-CoA dehydrogenase deficiency. And we may also have neurohypoglycemia by defective glucose transport protein. So the diagnostic workup when you can suspect persistent hyperinsulinism is to do a critical sample, but we have a pathway for that, which I will discuss. So we mainly need the plasma insulin ketone bodies, which will define whether it is ketotic or non-ketotic hypoglycemia, and we need free fatty acid levels to be measured. So if it is non-ketotic, you either have hyperinsulinemia or you have fatty acid defects. That's why for the non-ketotic, these two are needed. And most of the newborn hypoglycemia in the first 24-48 hours is going to be non-ketotic in majority of the cases. Additional tests may include plasma ammonia. This helps in organic acidemia. It also helps in hyperinsulinemia due to the glutamate dehydrogenase activating gene mutation. And plasma cell carnitine profile, urine organic acids, and then you start testing for the serum cortisol growth hormone for looking at hypopituitarism or glucocorticoid deficiency as well. The genetic testing will follow, and imaging will be needed like PET-CT if you're thinking of nesidioblastosis, that is to look at the pancreas. So the underlying cause that you think is the reason and the severity will dictate the approach to the management. So this is a busy slide, so I've broken it up. We have the hypoglycemic event, and the baby can be symptomatic or asymptomatic. If the baby is asymptomatic, you feed and monitor, and if euglycemia is achieved, continue the normal schedule. And if hypoglycemia persists, you may consider either feeding support or IV dextrose if it is not picking up. And if it is symptomatic, you give a dextrose bolus and go for the infusion as we discussed. If the hypoglycemia persists for a long time, or it's a very high glucose infusion rate as we saw in the previous slides, you have to obtain the bloods. If the hypoglycemia resolves, you monitor and discharge. So the bloods we obtain initially are the plasma insulin, free fatty acids. Of course, the free fatty acid test takes time. It doesn't come immediately. So you'll have the insulin and you'll have the serum and urine ketone levels. If it is a ketotic problem, it's a totally different branch. As I said, most of them in the beginning are non-ketotic. If they're coming from home with the hypoglycemic seizure, you could think of this category more. If they're in the hospital in the first 48 hours or so, this category is more likely, and many of these are transient as well. So you have the transient hyperinsulinism in the IUGR babies, in the LGA babies, in the infant of diabetic mothers. Even in Beckwith-Wiedemann syndrome, the hyperinsulinism is transient. The persistent hyperinsulinism is where we think of the genetic mutations. So in the non-ketotic category, if the free fatty acid is low, you would have the insulin level by the next day. So you'll have a high insulin, which will put this baby to this category. So before the free fatty acid level, mostly we get the hyperinsulinism confirmation. Once you know it's hyperinsulinism, if it's not responding to your regular treatment, you give a trial of diazoxide. If the trial fails, then it's mostly the non-GDH pathway, and you may consider octreotide or octreotide plus glucagon. Rarely nifedipine can be used, and if it fails, you go for imaging for the pancreas with PET-CT and surgery based on what you find, either a subtotal pancreatectomy, or if it's a diffuse disease, you have to do near total. Majority of the time, they become diabetic after that treatment. If they respond to the diazoxide trial, continue the diazoxide with close endocrine supervision. If they are ketotic, then if the lactate is high, they become gluconeogenesis enzyme defects. And if the lactate is low, it may be hypopituitarism or hypocortisolism, GSD type 1, or ketotic hypoglycemia. So this is the simple way of differentiating hyperinsulinism. So you do the plasma insulin and you do the ketones. If the ketones are negative, you have hyperinsulinism as a very high chance. If hyperinsulinism is, if insulin is normal, so basically you have to do the insulin when the sugar is low, when it is below 40, and any detectable insulin is supposed to be high when your blood sugar is low. So normally you take more than 2 units as abnormal. So there are mutations which lead to hyperinsulinism, as we discussed in the very beginning. Most prevalent cause is a loss of function mutation of the potassium ATP channel, and this leads to profound hypoglycemia. This may also not respond to diazoxide. So we also have mutations of the mitochondrial enzyme GDH. This is an activating mutation, and glucokinase activating mutation also can cause a similar problem, because the ATP is constantly high, so the potassium channel is activated, and we have the depolarization causing the voltage-gated calcium channel to be opening up, and the insulin is secreted in excess. We also have mutations in the hydroxyacyl-CoA dehydrogenase factor. So we have Beckwith-Wiedemann syndrome, we have a mosaic of Turn syndrome, Costello syndrome may be associated with hyperinsulinemia and hypoglycemia. And persistent hyperinsulinemic hypoglycemia is now a new term. We don't use nesidioblastosis anymore, and we call it PHHI. The previous term of congenital hyperinsulinism is also not used anymore. So this is a rare condition associated with persistently elevated levels of circulating insulin caused by hypersecretion of the pancreatic beta cells and absence of ketone production. And it may present in the first few days, or it may present later in infancy. Many different metabolic disorders can also lead to persistent hypoglycemia, and glycogen storage disease, disorders of gluconeogenesis, and fat oxidation. Thankfully, these are rare. The incidence of the mutations that we discussed here, it's about 30 to 50,000 babies, so it's not common. So more common is a transient hyperinsulinism that we see. So once you have hyperinsulinism, the treatment approach is to use glucocorticoids as a short-term measure. Most of us move away from using steroids. And glucagon can be used for a short term. If the sugar is low and you don't have access, it can be used by intramuscular subcutaneous or IV route. Diazoxide is not effective in potassium channel related problems, and it is effective in GDH activating mutation. The GDH activating mutation, the typical differentiating feature will be a high ammonia with the non-ketotic hypoglycemia. And the diazoxide is 10 to 15 milligram per kilogram 8 hourly. Watch for fluid retention and hypertrichosis. Somatostatin analogs are used where it is diazoxide is not effective, and that can be used in 5 to 25 microgram per kilo per day, usually given 6 to 8 hourly. Calcium channel blockers are not preferred in babies, though it may help in some cases in short term, but in persistent hyperinsulinism, usually these are not effective. And of course, if you have significant persistent hyperinsulinism, you may need surgical treatment.